If you had driven past our old house on Maple Avenue in Oxford, Mississippi, you'd never have guessed the truth. To the outside world, we were the picture of Southern charm, neatly trimmed hedges, white shutters, a flag on the porch that fluttered on Sundays. People waved at my husband, Walter Baker, thinking he was a fine, God-fearing man, a man of respect, a man who, for 10 years, kept me locked in a basement beneath that very house, like I was less than human. My name is Jean Baker, and I'm 78 years old now. When I finally escaped at the age of 58, I had to learn how to speak to people again. I hadn't seen the sun in a decade. I hadn't felt the wind, smelled honeysuckle, or watched children play. I'd stopped being a wife, a mother, a woman. I was just a shadow in the dark, waiting for the world to remember me. But the world never did. Not until I clawed my way out. I was born and raised right here in Oxford. My daddy was a World War II vet, and my mama was the kind of woman who could make a pie out of nothing and still make you feel like it was Sunday dinner. We didn't have much, but we had each other. My family believed in hard work, in holding your head up even when it rained for weeks. I grew up believing people were good, that if you loved someone enough, they'd love you back. That belief nearly killed me. I met Walter when I was 35, already a single mother to a sweet baby girl named Emily. My first husband, Mark, died in a car crash on Highway 6 when Emily was just 2. I spent the next few years trying to rebuild our lives, working at the local bakery in the mornings and waitressing at night. That's when Walter walked into my life. He was kind, at first, always opening doors, complimenting my pies, making Emily laugh with his silly faces. He'd just moved to Oxford from Jackson and was working at the courthouse. Folks said he was one of the good ones, quiet, steady, dependable. And Lord, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe him. We got married a year later. I thought I was giving Emily a father again. I thought I was choosing love after loss. For a while, it felt like I was right. Walter was attentive, helpful with Emily, respectful to my parents. But slowly, subtly, things started changing. He didn't want me working late shifts anymore. He said it wasn't proper for a married woman. He wanted Emily homeschooled, said the public school system was full of nonsense. He didn't like me talking to old friends, even at church. Said women should keep to their family. At first, I thought it was old-fashioned, maybe even sweet, but the sweetness turned to stone, kindness twisted into rules. His soft tone became sharp. His touch, once comforting, grew cold. By the time I turned 48, I was a ghost in my own home. Emily was a teenager, confused and afraid. And I was too ashamed to tell anyone. I'd made my bed. I had to lie in it, or so I thought. The day Walter locked me in the basement started like any other. I had made breakfast grits and scrambled eggs. He was in a foul mood. Angry, I'd mailed a letter to my sister in Memphis without telling him. That was my crime. That one act of defiance. He snapped. I can still remember the way his eyes looked, like something unrecognizable had taken over. He grabbed my arm so hard I felt the bones grind, dragged me down the basement steps. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was the bottom hem of Emily's skirt as she rushed out the front door for school. 10 years in that basement, no windows, a single light bulb, a cot, a toilet, a bucket of water. He came down twice a day with food, never spoke, never let me out. The world forgot me. Emily was told I'd abandoned them. Everyone else believed I'd cracked under grief and run away, but I was alive, barely. And what kept me alive wasn't rage, it was hope. Hope that someday, somehow, someone would remember me. Or I'd find a way to make them see me again. Before the silence, before the chains, there was laughter. I still remember the first time Walter smiled at me across the counter at Miller's Bakery. It was a rainy Thursday morning, and I had flour on my cheek and exhaustion in my bones. He was wearing a gray suit and carrying a black umbrella, and when he stepped in, he took off his hat and said, "Ma'am, I don't know what smells better, your pecan pie or your perfume." I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in years. It had been 3 years since Mark passed, and my life had turned into survival mode. I was trying to keep a roof over Emily's head and food on the table. At night, I cried into a pillow so she wouldn't hear me. I wore strength like a coat, heavy and tight. But Walter offered something different. He was charming, not in that flashy way that made you uneasy, but in the slow, polite way Southern men can be. He'd ask about my day. He'd bring me fresh peaches from the market. He remembered Emily's birthday before I even told him. And Emily, oh, she adored him. He'd braid her hair and read her stories and tell her he was going to keep us both safe. After just 6 months of dating, he proposed. We were sitting on a quilt at Avent Park, and he pulled out a simple silver ring. "You've done it all on your own. Jean," he said, "let me take care of you now, and Lord help me. I wanted to be taken care of. I wanted to rest." We married in a small church just outside of town. Emily wore a blue ribbon in her hair, and my mother cried through the whole ceremony. Walter's parents were both gone, and he didn't have siblings. Said he moved to Oxford to start fresh. I thought it was romantic. Our first few months as a family were good. I quit my evening shift so I could be home more, and we had dinner together every night: meatloaf, cornbread, sweet tea, the usual comfort food. Walter built a porch swing for me, painted the kitchen yellow like I'd always wanted. We even started attending First Baptist together. But then, little changes. At first, he didn't want me driving at night, said the roads were too dangerous. Then it became not wanting me to drive at all. He didn't like me talking to my coworker, Sally, from the bakery, said she was a gossip. One Sunday after church, I was chatting with Pastor Jim's wife about a recipe, and he gripped my elbow a little too tight as we walked away. "No need to be so friendly with every man's wife," he hissed. "People will talk." I remember brushing it off, told myself he was just being protective, but protection shouldn't feel like a noose. Emily began noticing too. She asked why Daddy didn't want us visiting Grandma as often, or why I didn't go to the beauty parlor anymore. I lied. I told her Daddy just liked things simple, that we had to respect his wishes. That was my biggest mistake. The more I gave, the more he took. He said the mailman was flirting with me and told me to let him check the mail. He installed a second lock on the front door, just in case, he claimed. One day, I saw him going through my purse. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "A husband has a right to know what his wife is hiding." I told myself to pray harder, to be patient. But praying didn't stop him from screaming when I tried to call my sister in Memphis. It didn't stop the slap across my face when I argued back. That was the first time he hit me. He cried afterward, sobbed, actually, and begged for forgiveness. Said he was stressed from work. Promised it would never happen again. I believed him. I needed to believe him, because if I didn't, then I had to accept the truth that I had brought a monster into our home, that I had let him become a father to my daughter. The apologies stopped soon after. They were replaced by silence. Long stretches where he wouldn't speak to me at all. Emily asked why Daddy was so angry all the time. I told her he was just tired, that adults get like that. She didn't believe me. Kids always know. By the time Emily turned 13, I was no longer allowed to visit her school. Walter said it was better for her to focus. I wasn't allowed to walk downtown or go to the store alone. He called it keeping the family close. The day he took my driver's license from my wallet, I didn't even cry. I just felt numb. Looking back, I see it now for what it was. Control, brick by brick, until I was surrounded by invisible walls. I used to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was, wondering if someday Emily would grow up and get out, wondering if I would still be here when she did. I didn't know then that I'd be buried alive before I ever got my answer. It was a Thursday morning in March. I remember the smell of bacon sizzling on the stovetop and the soft hum of the radio playing gospel music. I had woken early, trying to keep peace in the house by making Walter's favorite breakfast biscuits, gravy, and scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar. Emily was already up and packing her bag for school, her long, dark hair tied in a loose braid down her back. Walter came down in one of his silent moods. No good morning, no smile, just that cold look in his eyes that always made my stomach twist. I set his plate down gently, careful not to clatter the fork. He didn't touch the food. Instead, he slid something across the table toward me. It was an envelope. I opened it slowly, my hands already shaking. Inside was the letter I had written to my sister in Memphis 2 weeks earlier, the one I thought I'd mailed while Walter was at work. "Found this in the trash can outside," he said, his voice low and tight. I didn't know what to say. I had written to Sarah because I missed her, because I needed someone to know that things weren't right. I hadn't said much, just that I was tired, that things were difficult, and that I hoped we could visit sometime. But to Walter, it was betrayal. "You went behind my back," he hissed. "You don't get to do that." Emily looked up from the stairs. "Daddy, what's going on?" "Nothing. Sweetheart, get your backpack. The bus will be here soon," he snapped, never taking his eyes off me. She hesitated, then hurried out the front door. That's when it happened. Walter stood up so suddenly that his chair scraped hard against the floor. He grabbed my wrist hard and yanked me to my feet. I cried out in pain, but he didn't let go. He dragged me through the kitchen, down the hallway, and to the basement door. "Walter, please," I screamed. I didn't mean please let me go. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He opened the door, shoved me down the first few steps, and slammed it behind me. The bolt clicked shut like the sound of a gun being cocked. I clawed at the door, banging my fists, screaming until my voice cracked. Nothing, not a sound from upstairs, just darkness. The light bulb at the bottom of the steps flickered. I stood there, barefoot, my ankle throbbing from the fall. I looked around and saw what he'd done. A cot, a bucket, a tin plate, a jug of water. This wasn't rage. This was planned. He had prepared for this. The basement wasn't finished, just concrete walls and exposed pipes. There was one small, high window, too narrow for a body. No blankets, no pillow, just a room meant to hold someone who didn't matter. I didn't know then that I would be down there for the next 10 years. That night, he didn't come. I sobbed until my throat went dry. I curled into a ball on the cot, still wearing my apron, the flour from breakfast smudged across my sleeve. I thought he would come back and let me out, that this was just some twisted punishment. But the next morning, he came down with a tray of food. No words. He left the tray, took the empty plate from the day before, and walked out, locked the door behind him. That's how it was every day. Twice a day, he came down with food. No eye contact, no conversation, just silent cruelty. The worst part, I could hear life continuing above me. I heard Emily's footsteps, her music, her laughter when friends came over. I heard the phone ring, the television in the evenings. Sometimes I even heard Walter talking to the neighbors on the porch, pretending like everything was normal. I wanted to scream every time someone walked past the house. I'm here. I'm still alive. But no one heard me. No one imagined. Walter told everyone I'd left, packed up and disappeared, said the stress of our marriage had been too much, that I'd walked out on him and Emily. People pitied him, brought him casseroles and condolences. I was the villain in the story he told. Emily believed him. I could tell. Her voice lost its joy. I only heard her crying once, late one night, when she thought she was alone. And me, I started to disappear, not just from the world, but from myself. Days blended into weeks. I lost count of the seasons. My skin turned pale, my hair grayed, my hands became thin and trembling. I stopped speaking because what was the point? But I never stopped listening. I began marking time in the only way I could, scratches on the wall, one line for each day. After a few months, I ran out of space on the first patch and started again. I survived because of hope. Not much, but just enough. I imagined Emily reading that letter. I imagined her finding it in a drawer one day. I imagined my sister coming to the house, demanding answers. I imagined light pouring down those stairs and someone shouting my name. It never came, but I held on to that vision, like a thread in my hand, keeping me from falling into the abyss. Until the day I decided if no one came for me, I would have to come for myself. Time doesn't work the same when you're locked away. You don't measure it in hours or days. You measure it by the sound of footsteps overhead, the way the light bulb flickers, or the shifting of cold air through the cracks in the stone. In that basement, I stopped being a person and started becoming a presence, a thing that breathed and waited. The first few weeks were the worst. My body was sore from sleeping on the thin cot. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. Why? What had changed in Walter so completely that he could do this? Did Emily really believe I left her? Was there anyone out there still thinking of me? I clung to those questions because they reminded me I still existed. Every morning and every evening, Walter brought food, never more, never less. He never looked at me, not once. He set the tray down, took the empty one, and locked the door behind him. Sometimes I'd beg. I'd plead. I'd fall to my knees, asking to see Emily, asking for just 5 minutes of sunlight, but his eyes stayed empty. I stopped begging after the second month. My voice was gone, hoarse from crying into the void. There was no clock, no calendar, just that dim bulb overhead, humming faintly like it pitied me. I marked the days with my fingernail against the wall. I scratched tiny lines until my nails cracked and my skin bled. Then I used bits of chipped stone. One wall became a record of time. When I ran out of space, I started again on the next. 10 lines, then a gap, 10 lines, another gap. It became a rhythm, a ritual. My body changed. My skin turned pale like wax. My muscles wasted. Some nights, I'd lie on the cot staring into the dark, feeling my heartbeat just to make sure I was still there. My hair turned white by the 4th year. I didn't even see it happening. I only knew because Walter once dropped a handheld mirror cracked and dusty, and I caught a glimpse of myself. I didn't recognize the woman in that reflection. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It wasn't the loneliness. It was hearing life continue above me. Emily's voice changed as she grew older. I heard her laughing with friends, arguing with Walter, singing softly in her room late at night. I imagined her walking across the kitchen floor, just a few feet above my head, unaware that her mother was beneath her the whole time. One time, I think it was sometime during the second year, I heard her cry. She sobbed so hard I could feel it in my bones. She shouted, "Why did she leave me?" and slammed her door. I crumbled to the floor and held myself, whispering over and over, "I didn't leave you, baby. I didn't." Another time, year 5. Maybe I heard her ask Walter directly, "Did Mom really just disappear? It doesn't make sense." Walter snapped at her. "You want to believe your mother left you for some man, go ahead. But don't expect me to lie to make it easier." I bit into my palm to keep from screaming. I think that was the moment something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for rescue. I stopped dreaming that someone would find me by chance. I realized I had to survive long enough to escape myself. That's when I began watching, listening, learning. Walter was a creature of habit. Same time every day, same number of footsteps. He hummed when he was in a good mood, usually after drinking. He limped slightly when it rained. Sometimes I could hear the jingle of his keys before he even reached the door. I began to memorize everything, where he placed the tray, how long he stayed, whether he locked the door with one turn or two. I studied those sounds like scripture. I also found ways to stay sane. I tore threads from the cot and wove little knots, practicing patterns so I wouldn't forget how to use my fingers. I sang songs from childhood, hymns mostly. Amazing Grace. His eye is on the sparrow. Sometimes I'd hum them so softly I wasn't sure if the sound came from me or from the walls. In the corner, I found an old cardboard box left behind from years ago. Inside were rusty nails, a broken belt, and a plastic spoon. I hid them under the cot like they were treasure. Not because I could use them, but because they were mine. Something Walter hadn't chosen for me. One day, a small mouse crept in through a hole in the wall. Most folks would scream, but to me, that mouse was a miracle. I whispered to it, left it crumbs, watched it scurry in and out. It reminded me the world still existed, that if something as small as a mouse could find its way in, maybe I could find a way out. That thought kept me alive during the darkest moments, especially the winters. The cold in that basement was like death, damp, silent, cruel. My fingers would go numb. My breath came out in clouds. Some nights I wondered if it would be better to just let go. But then I'd hear Emily's voice again, just above me, laughing, crying, growing, and I knew I couldn't die without telling her the truth. I couldn't let Walter win. By the 8th year, I had developed a plan. I began sharpening a piece of metal I broke from the cot's frame, slowly, carefully. I used the rough edge of a stone to grind it down to a point. I didn't even know what I'd do with it yet, but it made me feel like I had a choice, like I wasn't powerless anymore. The 9th year was when my hope came closest to dying. Emily left for college. I heard the suitcase drag down the hallway. I heard the car start. I heard Walter's voice say, "You'll be just fine without her." And then, silence. No more footsteps above. Walter was alone, and so was I. But that silence gave me something new opportunity. He drank more. He grew careless, and I grew ready. Because after 10 years of being forgotten, I was going to make damn sure the world remembered Jean Baker. I don't know what gave me the courage to try that day. Maybe it was the way the key jingled a beat too long in Walter's hand, Or maybe it was how the door didn't click shut the same way it usually did. But the moment I heard his footsteps fade away and realized the deadbolt hadn't fully turned, something inside me roared awake. It had been nearly 9.5 years since the basement swallowed me. 9.5 years of silence, shame, and scraped up hope. And suddenly, a crack of possibility. I stood frozen for a full minute, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might betray me. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I braced myself for the usual resistance, for the cold, unmoving steel. But it turned. It turned. The door creaked open just a few inches, enough for the stale basement air to mix with the warm scent of spring drifting in from the kitchen. I nearly collapsed. Real light flooded the stairwell. Dust sparkled in the beam like tiny angels. I climbed slowly, afraid each step would groan too loud, afraid Walter would come storming back and slam the door again, only this time, forever. The kitchen was almost exactly as I remembered. A little dustier, maybe. The same ceramic rooster sat on the counter. A framed photo of Emily from high school stood next to a recipe book. I touched it. She looked so grown, so far away. I wanted to fall to my knees and sob, but I didn't have time. I moved quietly. The front door was just a few feet away. I could already see the sunlight dancing through the beveled glass window. Just a few more steps and I'd be free. That's when I heard the engine. Walter's truck. I panicked. I turned the lock on the front door as fast as I could, but my fingers were stiff from years of cold and tremors. The latch stuck. I jiggled the knob. I pulled. I yanked. The door wouldn't budge. The tires crunched over gravel outside. I dropped to the floor and crawled behind the old recliner just as the front door swung open. Walter stepped inside and stopped cold. The basement door stood wide open, and the tray was still in his hand. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He smiled. That crooked, hateful smile I hadn't seen since the first day he locked me away. I was wondering how long it'd take, he said, slowly setting the tray down on the entry table. You've been listening, haven't you? I tried to run, but he was faster. He caught me before I reached the back hallway, threw me against the wall so hard the mirror shattered beside my head. I fell to the floor, dizzy, ears ringing. You think you can just walk out, he growled. After everything you've done, after abandoning us, I tried to crawl away, but he kicked me in the ribs, hard. The pain ripped through my side like fire. He dragged me by the arm, across the wooden floor, down the hallway back to that stairwell. No more mercy, he said. Back in the basement, he threw me to the floor. The door slammed, and this time I heard 3 locks turn, then the unmistakable sound of a wooden board sliding into place. He was sealing me in. I lay there for hours, maybe a day. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. My ribs throbbed with every inhale. My lip bled onto the concrete. That night, he didn't bring food, nor the next. On the 3rd day, I began to hallucinate. I saw my mother standing in the corner, whispering scripture. I saw Emily as a child, brushing my hair. I begged them not to leave me again, but they were never really there. When Walter finally returned, he didn't bring a tray. He brought a bucket of water and tossed it at me. The cold hit like ice. I gasped, curled into a ball. He said nothing, just watched me suffer, then left. I didn't try again for a long time. Not because I lost hope, but because I needed to plan better. Because now I knew something he didn't. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. And he could make them again. So I waited I nursed my wounds as best I could, used a scrap of cloth from the cot to wrap my side, bit down on my sleeve when I coughed. I forced myself to move a little each day, even if it was just to stand and stretch my arms. I sharpened the metal shard again, smoothed the edge, hid it deep in the mattress padding. Every creak of the floor above became a lesson. Every silence taught me rhythm. Walter thought he'd broken me, but he hadn't. He'd only taught me how to listen, how to wait, and how to strike when the time came, after the failed escape. Walter grew more careful, but also more predictable. That was his flaw. He believed locking the basement tighter would keep me defeated. But what he didn't understand was that he'd already lit a fire in me the day I tasted the kitchen air again. I'd seen sunlight. I'd seen my daughter's photograph. I remembered what it felt like to exist above ground. There was no locking that out of my mind. The months dragged on like rusted chains. But I waited. I listened. Every footstep, every creak of the floorboards above became part of my blueprint. I memorized his routine like scripture. When he slept, when he drank, when he forgot things, especially when he drank. Walter never used to be a heavy drinker, but the older he got, the more he relied on whiskey to fill his silence. I heard him stumbling upstairs some nights, cursing at old television shows, shouting at the walls. Once, I even heard him say my name not in anger, but in something closer to fear. That's when I knew he wasn't just controlling me anymore. He was afraid of me. By year 10, my hands were worn thin, my body frail, but my mind had sharpened like the edge of the metal shard I still kept hidden in the mattress. One evening, the air shifted. Walter came down with dinner like always. He was drunk more than usual. I could smell it before he even opened the door. His boots clunked on the stairs. He was humming tunelessly, the way he did when he thought he was untouchable. He dropped the tray, but this time he forgot something crucial. He didn't lock the door. He pulled it shut, but the bolt never clicked. I waited long enough to be sure he wasn't coming back down. Then I crept to the stairs and nudged the door. It swung open with a soft groan. I didn't run this time. I didn't panic. I moved slowly, deliberately, like a ghost returning to the land of the living. The house smelled of old furniture and sour alcohol. The clock on the wall ticked loud, like a heartbeat. It was just after 11 p.m. Walter was passed out in his recliner, snoring, an empty bottle on his chest. I didn't dare go near the front door. It always creaked too loud. But the side door by the laundry room, that one I remembered, had a softer latch. My fingers trembled as I turned the knob. It opened. I stepped out barefoot into the Mississippi night, the grass cold and wet beneath me, the stars above blinding after so many years underground. I could barely stand, but I forced myself forward, one shaky step at a time. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from that house. Across the yard stood a small white cottage. The porch light was on. Mrs. Clara Jenkins. She'd lived next door since I first moved to Oxford. She used to bring pies over. She held Emily when she was a baby. She'd once told me, "Jean, if you ever need anything, you come knock on my door." I never thought I'd take her up on it in the middle of the night, looking like a ghost dragged out of the grave. I reached her porch, barely able to lift my hand. My knuckles tapped against the wood just once before my legs gave out beneath me. I remember falling, then nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed. The beeping of machines was soft, steady. A warm blanket covered me, and my name was being spoken like a prayer. Jean, can you hear me? I opened my eyes, and there she was, Emily, older, wiser, her eyes filled with tears and disbelief. "Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, reached for her hand. She took it, and in that moment, I was no longer a prisoner. I was a mother again. Mrs. Jenkins had found me unconscious on her porch and called 911. When the police came and searched the Baker house, they found the basement exactly as I'd left it: cot, bucket, claw marks on the walls, years of evidence in plain sight. Walter was arrested the next day. He didn't fight it, didn't deny a word. I don't know if it was shame, madness, or some twisted relief that it was finally over. But when they took him away in handcuffs, he just looked at me once from the back of the police car and looked away. In the weeks that followed, I began to heal not just my body, but my mind. Emily stayed with me every day in the hospital. She cried over and over, blaming herself for not knowing, for believing him. But I told her what I knew to be true. He fooled all of us, but it's over now. Baby, we're free. Mrs. Jenkins visited too. She brought me soup and sat by my bed, knitting and humming. She said, "Jean, you were always strong, even when none of us could see it." And for the first time in years, I believed her. Because escaping that basement wasn't just about unlocking a door. It was about unlocking the woman I'd once been and deciding she was still worth saving. Freedom wasn't a door swinging open. It was a long hallway. And I had to learn how to walk again physically and spiritually. The weeks after Walter's arrest were a blur of doctors, detectives, and therapists. My body was fragile, like paper soaked in water. My bones ached. My hands shook when I tried to hold a fork. I had to relearn how to sleep without fear that a lock would turn behind me. But more than that, I had to remember how to live. At first, I stayed with Emily. She'd moved back to Oxford temporarily, taking a leave from her teaching job in Baton Rouge. She turned her spare room into a soft, quiet space for me: fresh sheets, lemon-scented candles, a small bookshelf filled with the classics she remembered I loved. She held me when I cried at nothing. She sat with me through the nightmares. She played records at night, soft jazz and old gospel, to help me sleep. Sometimes I'd wake up and find her sleeping in the armchair beside me, still holding my hand. One night, I whispered to her in the dark, "I thought I lost you." She squeezed my fingers. "No, Mama, you saved me. You survived. That saved me." It took months before I could go outside without flinching. I remember the first time I stepped onto her front porch. The sunlight hit my face, and I just stood there with tears rolling down my cheeks. I was breathing free air again. The sky had never looked so wide, and yet something inside me still felt heavy. It wasn't enough to have escaped. I needed to make sure other women never had to live in the dark like I did. That's when I met Rebecca Langston. She was a lawyer and advocate for survivors of domestic violence, running a small but mighty women's support group out of a church basement on the edge of town. Emily brought me there one afternoon. I was reluctant, quiet. I didn't know if I had anything to say, but when I walked in and saw the circle of folding chairs, the faces of women aged 20 to 70, the eyes that held pain and strength all at once, I knew I belonged. Rebecca welcomed me gently, like I was already known to her. "You're safe here, Jean," she said. "You don't have to speak today. Just be." But I did speak, slowly, at first, then with more clarity. My story poured out in fragments, one for each year I had lost, and when I finished, there were no gasps of pity. No eyes averted in shame, only quiet nods, and tears that weren't just mine. That night, Rebecca pulled me aside and said, "Jean, you don't know how many women need to hear your story. You don't know how many you've just helped." That sentence lit something in me brighter than the sun ever had. I began attending the meetings weekly. Then I started volunteering. I folded flyers, made calls, sat beside women in court who were too afraid to face their abusers alone. Then, one morning, Rebecca said something that changed everything. "We've been offered a grant to open a safe house outside town. It would be a shelter, a counseling center, a new beginning for women and children who have nowhere else to go. We want to name it after someone whose story reminds us that survival is just the beginning." I stared at her, not understanding. Then she smiled and said, "The Jean Baker House." My knees nearly buckled. I had never asked to be a symbol. I had only wanted to be heard. But now, I could be hope. Not just for me, but for every woman who'd been told to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay locked away. The center opened 9 months later in an old farmhouse just outside Oxford. It had a white picket fence, lavender growing in the front, and a brass plaque by the door. The Jean Baker House, a place for healing, a place for hope. I cut the ribbon with Emily standing beside me, holding my hand the same way I used to hold hers when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. There were cameras, journalists, survivors who hugged me with trembling arms, and above it all, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the yard. Life was returning. I became more than a name on a plaque. I gave talks, visited churches, shared my story on local radio. Some people said it was too much, too dark, too painful, but I didn't care, because every time I spoke, another woman came forward. Another story was shared. Another silence was broken. One day, a young woman arrived at the center holding a toddler in one arm and a hospital bracelet on the other. She didn't say much, just looked at me and whispered, "I heard you on the radio." I thought, maybe you'd understand. I hugged her, and I told her the truth. I don't just understand. I believe you. And I'm here, because that's what I had longed to hear in the dark. And now, I got to say it for someone else. The courthouse in Oxford had barely changed. Same brick facade, same white columns that once felt so grand when I was a girl. But the day I returned not as a visitor, not as a bystander, but as a witness to my own pain, those columns looked smaller, less permanent, less intimidating, because I had changed. It had been over a year since I escaped the basement. The bruises had faded, the bones had mended, but the wounds you carry inside, that's a different kind of healing. I still woke some nights with the smell of damp concrete clinging to my memory, but each day I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and now I would face him. Walter Baker had been charged with unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, domestic abuse, and psychological torture. It sounded like a list ripped from a movie script, but it was real, and I was the living proof. The courtroom was filled the morning the trial began. Reporters, townsfolk, members of the support center, even strangers who had read about the case in the Clarion Ledger. Some couldn't believe the nice man from the courthouse had done such monstrous things. Others just wanted a story. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for me and for Emily, who sat in the front row with her hands folded tight in her lap. Walter entered the room in a tan prison jumpsuit. His once pressed shirt and polished shoes were long gone. He looked older, smaller, like time had deflated the image he'd worked so hard to maintain. But his eyes, they were still cold, He didn't look at me as he sat down. I looked at him the entire time. The prosecution built the case carefully. They brought in photos from the basement, my scratches on the wall, the makeshift bed, the mold on the pipes. They showed the doctor's reports, the weight loss, the old injuries left untreated, and they played the 911 recording from Mrs. Jenkins, her voice cracking as she said, "There's a woman on my porch. She says she's been locked in her husband's basement for 10 years, but nothing compared to my testimony." I took the stand, one slow breath at a time. The courtroom went quiet as I settled into the wooden chair. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, but I focused on just one Emily's. She nodded softly, urging me forward. I was 48 years old when he locked me down there. I began, my voice steady. I'm 78 now. That's 30 years since I married him, and 10 years since I was last allowed to choose anything for myself. I told them everything, how it started with control, with isolation, with fear, how he used love like a leash and silence like a weapon. I described the years in the basement, the cold, the hunger, the hallucinations, the way I clung to the sound of my daughter's voice through the floorboards. I looked straight at Walter when I said, "You tried to bury me alive." But I was not dead. I was waiting. The courtroom didn't move, and neither did he. When I stepped down from the stand, people wept quietly in the back. Even the court reporter wiped her eyes. I felt no shame, no weakness. I had told my truth, and I had done it standing tall. The defense didn't have much. They tried to paint Walter as mentally ill, claimed he was under stress, that perhaps he believed I had chosen to live in that basement after a breakdown. But the jury didn't buy it. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Walter Baker to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. He would never control another breath of mine. As they led him away in shackles, he finally looked at me. I expected hate, or maybe pity, but I saw nothing. Just the empty, hollow gaze of a man who had lost control and couldn't understand how. And I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, but because justice had spoken, not in rage, but in truth. After the trial, reporters followed me outside. One asked, "Ms. Baker, what would you say to other women in abusive situations right now?" I paused, the spring breeze lifting my hair as I looked out across the courthouse lawn. I would say this: you are not invisible. You are not weak, and you are not alone, because I had once believed no one would come for me, and I had been wrong. That night, Emily and I lit a candle in the window of her home. She said it was for all the women still waiting in silence. And as the flame flickered, I whispered a prayer for those still locked away, and for those who had made it out but didn't know how to begin again. Because I had learned something powerful in that courtroom. Survival is a kind of justice. But telling your story, that's how you win. After the trial, I didn't disappear. I know some survivors want that quiet, distance, a chance to forget. And I understood that need. But for me, silence was where the pain had grown. I couldn't go back to it. Not after I'd fought so hard to climb out of it. So I stayed visible, and that visibility became a kind of mission. The Jean Baker House became more than a shelter. It became a symbol. We expanded into counseling services, legal aid partnerships, and vocational training. What started with 5 beds turned into 20, and before I knew it, we had helped over 300 women and children. Each woman who came through our doors carried a different kind of wound. Some came with fresh bruises. Others with invisible ones, the kind that don't show up on skin, but settle deep in the spirit. And no matter their story, we welcome them the same way, with light, with safety, and with the unwavering truth that they mattered. I met young women who reminded me of Emily, women who had been told their voices were too loud, their questions too bold. I sat with them during intake interviews, held their hands in courtrooms, celebrated their birthdays, and cried when they told me they'd finally found a job or gotten their first apartment. One woman, I'll never forget her, was only 19. She said, "You don't know what it's like to be locked away like an animal." And I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Sweetheart, I do." She broke down in my arms. Those were the moments I knew my pain had not been wasted. I never remarried. People asked me sometimes, with kind curiosity. I'd just smile and say, "I've learned to love my own company, and that's more than enough." Instead, I poured my love into the work, into my garden, and most of all, into Emily. She came back to Oxford for good, settling just 5 minutes from my house. She eventually married a kind man named Ray and gave me 2 grandchildren, Maggie and Jonah, the first time Maggie called me Grandma Jean. I wept in the kitchen with flour on my hands and joy in my heart. We made up for lost time. We took long walks, went to Sunday service, made peach cobbler just the way my mother used to, and sometimes, at night, we sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. "I still can't believe you made it out," Emily said once, staring at the stars. I reached over and held her hand. "I didn't just make it out," I whispered. "I came back to show the way." As the years went on, I slowed down. My knees ached more. My hands shook a bit when I poured my morning coffee. But my spirit well, that never dimmed. I kept going to the center. I told my story at local colleges, churches, town halls. I wanted people, especially young people, to know that monsters don't always come in the night. Sometimes they come with a smile, a wedding ring, and a promise. But even then, you still have the right to fight back. The mayor once told me, "Jean, you've changed the soul of this town." I told him I hadn't. I just reminded it what courage looks like. One afternoon, on my 77th birthday, the city of Oxford planted a magnolia tree in front of the center. A little girl who lived there at the time, a 6-year-old with big eyes and braids, asked me, "Miss Jean, why'd they plant a tree for you?" I knelt beside her and said, "Because once I lived in a place where nothing grew, and now we make sure that's never true for anyone else." She nodded like she understood every word, and I believe she did. At 78 years old, I've lived 2 lives. One above ground filled with pie baking, porch swings, my daughter's laughter, and the smell of magnolias in summer, and one below 10 long years in the dark, with nothing but concrete walls, a rusted cot, and the sound of my own heartbeat whispering, "You're still here." If you had told me then, back when I scratched days into stone and dreamed of a door opening, that one day I would be standing in front of women, guiding them toward freedom, I wouldn't have believed you. But now, I know this truth survival is not the end, it's the beginning. I am not defined by the years Walter stole from me. I am defined by the years I took back, the faces I've comforted, the hands I've held, the stories I've listened to with tears in my eyes because I know the sound of a voice that's been silenced too long. I often sit in my rocking chair now, out on the porch, and think about that night, the stars above me, the cold grass under my feet, the porch light on at Mrs. Jenkins' house. Just one light, and how that was all I needed to keep going. If you're hearing my voice right now or reading my words, I want you to know You are never too old to start again, never too lost to be found, never too broken to be rebuilt. You may be 28 or 78. You may be carrying secrets that weigh down your chest, but you are not alone. I once thought no one saw me. I thought I had been erased. But the truth is sometimes the world just doesn't know how to look. So look for someone today. Look for the quiet neighbor, the friend who stopped smiling, the woman who always makes excuses. And if that someone is you, please, don't wait for permission to fight for yourself. You already have it. I leave this world knowing that my pain planted seeds. And from those seeds grew a house with an open door. A house where no one is locked in, only held, only heard, only healed. If Jean's story touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know overcome something difficult later in life? Your story might be the light someone else is waiting for. Please consider subscribing to our channel for more real, powerful stories from strong souls like Jean, because every voice matters, and sometimes all it takes is one voice to change the world. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.